The following podcast is going to contain spoilers, along with me, just a regular guy, talking about all the things I love, such as comics, movies, television, music, and books. So yeah, proceed at your own risk. Welcome to another episode of Just Another Fanboy. I'm your host, Steven, and today I want to talk about podcasts. Not my podcast, other podcasts. A while back, I did an episode in which I went through the first, about half or so of my list of podcasts, and I just talked about the shows that I listen to each and every day that bring joy and excitement into my life. And I started alphabetically. I was going through the list alphabetically. I made it to the G's, the letter G, and then I stopped because we had run out of time. We were getting long for that episode, so I wanted to come back at some point with the part 2 and see if I can finish up going through my list. So let's not beat around the bush and let's get into it. All right, so the first podcast here, or the next podcast, if you are continuing on from the episode that I did however long ago, is Half Hour Wasted. Now, these are guys that have been podcasting for a long time. They, like me, were podcasting 13 or so years ago. They, like me, stopped, and they, like me, came back. This is Brad, Frank, and Bill. They're all Texas boys, and I've always enjoyed their model of podcasting. The idea was they sit around for 30 minutes and they talk about stuff that they enjoy. Comics, movies, television. Hey, it sounds kind of like Just Another Fanboy. And what they would do is that they would meet up and try to record 3 or 4 episodes at a time so that they only had to do it once a month or so. And that's a model I've been trying to emulate with Stephen or Else. I record podcast episodes practically every day, but I try once a week when I can get into the studio, try to record a backlog of episodes so that I don't ever find myself coming up to a day of the week, a Monday through Friday, and I don't have an episode ready for you guys. Now, the one thing about these fellas, though, is as they've gone along, they have kind of fallen behind. They're up to 464 episodes at this point. Their release schedule is a bit sporadic, but as long as you're subscribed to them, then you're going to get the episodes when they release. You know, if you're a podcaster, you hear a lot of tips out there from other podcasters that say, as long as you're doing a consistent schedule, if you have a schedule, if you're going to release once a week, then make sure you release once a week. If you're going to release once every 2 weeks, you make sure you hit that schedule every day because people count on that. And while I understand that, I get that. When Half Hour Wasted, for example, was weekly, they would come out every Wednesday, and I knew that when I got up Wednesday morning that I'd have an episode of Half Hour Wasted waiting for me, and it's one of my favorite shows, and I looked forward to that every week. Well, as they wound down and they stopped producing episodes, and now they're coming out sporadically, I don't get up every Wednesday and go, yay, it's Wednesday, we get an episode of Half Hour Wasted. I don't really think about it too much. But then an episode of theirs will pop up and I'll be like, yay, we get an episode of Half Hour Wasted. And I'll do like the snake with my arms, the wave, whatever it's called. I will lay down on the floor and I'll do the worm. I'll do that, which I don't recommend doing if you're large like me because stuff falls off the shelves. Anyway, Half Hour Wasted, Brad, Frank, and Bill, just talking about all the things that I love in life, such as comics, books, TV, movies, and all that good stuff. Next up is a show that I'm kind of hit and miss with. I haven't quite decided if I'm going to keep up with this show or not. I started listening to this show. It's called Infamous America, and I actually started listening to it because it's a guy who does another show I listen to that we'll get to here in a minute. Actually, it's the next. So we'll just go ahead and talk about both of them. Infamous America and Legends of the Old West. So this is Chris Wimmer, and he does, it's almost they're historical podcasts. Legends of the Old West is all about historical Old West figures such as Jesse James and Wyatt Earp. He's getting ready to do a series of episodes on Billy the Kid, and they're very informative, and he does it very well. It's just he just talks. It's scripted, you can tell, which it kind of has to be when it comes to historical information. So Legends of the Old West, I am a big fan of. Well, he started doing another one called Infamous America, which talks about the darker side of American history. And so far, I haven't been quite on board with it. He's been doing a series of episodes on the Black Sox, the 1919 World Series scandal. And while it seemed really interesting at first, I found that I didn't really care all that much. Legends of the Old West, I quite enjoy, however. Next up is the Middle-Aged Geek Podcast. This is a podcast. I used to know this dude a long time ago. His name's Jody Cooper. Just a dude that I made friends with online, met him in person a couple of times. Haven't talked to the dude in a long time, but he does this show with a friend of his called the Middle-Aged Geek Podcast. He hasn't put out a new episode, at least as of the time that I am recording this episode, which is mid-October. They haven't put out an episode since June, so I don't know if they will continue to put out episodes. They seem to be doing it monthly up to that point, but it's just two guys talking about geek culture. They're both big Godzilla freaks, so a lot of their episodes, or at least the latest episodes, a lot of them have been about Godzilla. And I don't know a lot about old school Godzilla, so those I found really interesting. Next up is the Chop Shop Podcast. We have a local comic book shop in Lawrence, Kansas. Lawrence, Kansas is not where I live, but it is where I work. It's where I shop. It's where I play. I don't play. I'm too lazy to play. But Chops Comics is a comic book shop. It's fairly new. I think it's been around for a couple of years. I've been in a number of times with the kids. It's a really nice comic book shop. It's not too big, not too small, very clean. Everybody that works there is friendly. It's very well organized. It's a good comic book shop. It's one of those good ones that you hear about every once in a while. Well, they do a show from the store once a week called the Chop Shop Podcast. It's a round table type of podcast in which they pick a particular book that they talk about for that week, and then they each go around the table and talk about their own picks. Next up is the Daily Rios. This is the podcast that Peter Rios started doing when he left Comic Geek Speak. This used to be a daily podcast, otherwise it wouldn't be called the Daily Rios. He has since gone to he releases episodes when he releases them. His is also a model that I want to try to emulate, but I can't quite pull the trigger on it. Basically, he's got the one umbrella called the Daily Rios, and then he does different episodes under that umbrella. He does the Tower, which is about the Teen Titans. He does Breakdowns, where he takes single issues and goes in depth page by page. He does I don't know what they're called. It's like a look back type of episode where he goes back 50 years, 30 years, 20 years, 10, something like that, and looks at the big news stories, what was released, characters that were created and whatnot in comics. It is something that I have thought about doing, just taking like right now, for example, I know I've talked about this before, but I've got the Everything or Else podcast feed. So really everything that I do, you can get there. And I have, every once in a while, I've toyed with the idea of just delete, just changing the name of that to Steven or Else. And then everything I release, whether it's Just Another Fanboy, an actual Steven or Else podcast, an Event or Else podcast, or whatever the heck I want to do, it will be released under that umbrella. And I think I'm kind of giving you the warning right now that I may eventually go to that model. Because for me, based on my proclivity to just really get excited about starting a project, doing the project for a little while, and then stopping and starting something else, I think it would make sense to have that all housed under one feed. Don't you? Because then, I'll get really excited about something, I'll do it, and then I'll stop because something else, shiny, and I'll run over there and I'll do that, and then I'll come back to the old one, and then I'll go back, and then a third thing will come up. So for me, it makes sense to house that all under one umbrella. So that's probably coming. Next up is the Ronin Rabbit podcast. This is a podcast done by Ed Moore, and it's all about Usagi Yojimbo, which is a anthropomorphic rabbit. Now, I don't read this book, and I'll be honest with you, I don't listen to every episode, but I listen to enough that I do find them interesting. Again, I don't read the book, but I find the episodes interesting enough that I can listen to the episodes and kind of enjoy the story. He just goes through issues and talks about what's going on in the world of Usagi Yojimbo, and I do enjoy it when I listen to it. Next up is the Sell More Book Show. When I decided a number of years ago that I was going to start writing and self-publishing books, I went out and started looking for podcasts, and there was a handful of podcasts that I listened to that talked about self-publishing and writing and marketing and all that stuff. Eventually, I narrowed it down to just this one show, the Sell More Book Show, hosted by Brian Cohen and Jim Kukral. It's a show that they've got a very standard format. They do 3 tips of the week, and then they do 5 news stories. And it's just all about helping you sell your self-published books. Now, I'm not at the level that these guys are. This is really, it's for folks who are trying to make a life out of writing and selling books by self-publishing. I'm not at that level. I don't think I'll ever be at that level, but I find them both really entertaining, and I do get a few good tips each week. And I find that sometimes I will incorporate some of those tips into what I'm doing with podcasting. All right, next up is a show called Voyage to the Stars. And this stars Janet Varney, Steve Berg, Colton Dunn, and Felicia Day. It's an improvised podcast. It's not completely improvised. They have a framework. They have a story that they're going to tell, but all the dialogue is improvised, and it's these 4 people in space. I'm not really going to give away much more than that. It's very, very funny. Very funny. Very well produced. Very funny. All right, the last podcast I have on my list is the WTF podcast with Mark Maron. Now, when it comes to big podcasting names, really when it comes to the world of podcasting, there are 3 big names that stand out. Joe Rogan, Kevin Smith, Mark Maron. I used to listen to some Kevin Smith podcasts. I don't anymore. Never really had any desire to listen to any Joe Rogan stuff. I don't think he's really my kind of style. Mark Maron, I really enjoy. I'll be honest. I don't listen to every episode. He puts a new episode out. If it's someone that I have even the slight bit of interest listening to, because it's an interview podcast. He interviews people. If it's somebody that I have even the slightest bit of interest listening to, I'll listen to the episode. If I haven't heard of the person he's interviewing, I'll look at the show notes, and if it sounds interesting, I'll listen to it. Otherwise, I pass. That releases 3 times a week, and I really enjoy it. At first, I'll be honest with you, when I first started listening to it, his interview style kind of turned me off. I feel like he interrupts the people he's interviewing quite often, but none of them seem to mind. I think that's why I had a problem with it. It's like, oh man, he is going to annoy this person, but none of them seem to mind. And I hear a lot from these folks that he has interviewed that just sing his praises as being a good interviewer. And I think it's because he has some bits of information. He has some questions that he wants to ask, but he gets the thing going, and then they're just talking. You can kind of tell during certain points where he'll kind of like to bring it back and ask a certain question. But he's got this interview style where one of the questions he wants to ask will get the person started on a story, which will lead to other questions. And, for all I know, he may have 3 questions that he's written down that he wants to ask. And by the end of the hour-long interview, he's asked 17, 19, 25 different questions. And I've learned some really interesting stuff on his show, and I've actually seen stuff on other websites. And even my wife will make comments. Oh, did you hear that so-and-so claimed this? I heard that they were on a podcast and they said this about one of the shows they used to work on. I said, yeah, that was the Mark Maron podcast. I just listened to that today. So it's a very popular show. And again, I don't listen to every episode, but I listen to enough. I bet I listen to at least one episode of his every single week. That's it. That's my list. That's my full list of podcasts. If I didn't name yours, I apologize. I have about a 20-minute ride to and from work. 20 minutes to work, 20 minutes home. Sometimes that can turn into 30 minutes depending on if I have to stop anywhere. And that's really the only time I have to listen to podcasts. Sometimes I'll be able to put my headphones in and listen to stuff while I'm at work, but otherwise it's about 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week. I do find myself, like right now, I'm at a point where I have a whole lot of episodes in my queue waiting to be listened to, and I don't know that I'll have enough time to listen to them. I do skip episodes now and again, depending on what podcast it is and depending on what they're talking about. But if you have a podcast that you think I should listen to, email me at feedback@stevenorelse.com and I'll give it a listen. And then maybe I'll do another one of these down the road, an update version of the podcast that I've started listening to based on listener suggestions. That'd be fun, wouldn't it? All right, well, that's the episode. I want to thank you for joining me. Until next time, I'm Steven, and I'm just another fanboy. Be nice to each other. Just Another Fanboy is a presentation of the Steven or Else podcast. Questions and comments can be directed to feedback@stevenorelse.com. You can support the show for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/StevenRor and get instant access to the My Other podcast, a weekly show about whatever crawls its way into my tiny little mind just moments before I tap record. You can find me on the World Wide Web at stevenorelse.com or find me on Twitter and Instagram by searching for @StevenOrElse. I also encourage you to subscribe to the show, leave us a 5-star review, and share this episode with a friend. Just Another Fanboy is a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. You can find that over at comicspodcasts.com. All links will be in the show notes.
Bye-bye, Daddy. Bye-bye, Daddy.
Good job.